Okay, great. Let's get started. I have a feeling more people will be joining us as time goes on. Hello, my name is Kieran O'Brien. I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Recycling Coalition. Welcome to our very different annual conference this year as we all kind of continue to manage through our way through this pandemic. As you know, we're doing things a little differently. We have 4 weeks of programming ahead of us, three 90-minute sessions each week. We hope you'll join us as we think we've put together a really good program for you. Before I get started, I just wanted to make a few announcements. I wanted to let you know that Eagle has recently released an RFP for their 2021 recycling grant program, and you can find that on the recycling webpage under grants on the Eagle webpage. MRC members should have received their ballot for the Board of Directors election, and the results of that election will be shared at the annual meeting on May 12th. Hope you'll join us for that. And some exciting news today, especially, is that we've been told that the House of Representatives will be considering the Part 115 package today. That will happen at 1:30 p.m. and you can go to Michigan House of Representatives. There's a button for House TV at the top to kind of watch those proceedings and see how that's happening. It's really an exciting day. Once it passes the House, which is we're hoping for today, then it goes on to the Senate. Today, we're focusing on developing a fundable project. Tomorrow, the topic is the case for recycling and your role in it. Tomorrow's program is really designed for local government decision makers and helping them understand what recycling has to offer right now. So please feel free to share information with your local decision makers about that program. We hope that it really provides them with a roadmap as to how they can benefit and what their obligations are as far as recycling and solid waste. Before we really get started, of course, I want to thank all of our sponsors. It is these sponsors and their contributions that allow us to do the things that we do. Many of these folks have been with us for years and have really supported all the important work we're doing, especially today's decision about Part 115. So thank you for that. By now, you are all kind of well knowledgeable about Zoom, but please keep yourself on mute. We welcome your questions throughout. Please feel free to put them in the chat box throughout the presentation, and then we will get to them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded. Please feel free to share that information if you think it's valuable and want to share that with colleagues. If you have technical issues or other needs, you can chat directly with Help Desk Terry. You'll find her in the chat box. And here's a little Zoom tip. You choose your view. While we will be highlighting the speaker, there is a box up in the top right corner of your screen that allows you to see either the gallery or the speaker. And you can size by moving that toggle to the left and right, the presentation versus the gallery or the speaker view. So you do have control. Developing a fundable project, how not to fail. We've got really three great speakers who are going to help you, I think, develop better projects. There's lots of opportunities right now. It is important, I think, to all of us that you're successful. You're carrying a piece of the puzzle. So we want to help you get the funding that you need. Our first speaker will be Josh Gunn. He's the Associate Director of the Community Food and Environment Institute at MSU Extension. MRC is working directly with Josh and some of his staff to develop a recycling leaders training that will probably be available in the next year and a half. So working more with MSU and Josh. You all know Matt Flechter. He's a market development specialist for the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Matt has done this work for years and years and years. You know him. A lot of the developments we've seen in recycling are because of a partnership with Matt in the lead. Likewise, Jim Fry is another person that has been in this biz for a long time, and as co-founder and CEO of RRS, I feel like RRS has been the wind beneath our wings, providing with data and research and expertise, and has really been pivotal in building understanding about best practices in recycling and how we move forward. So we're lucky to have these three guys with us today. Moving forward here, I will pass it off to Josh Gunn, who will take us through the first part of this event. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you so much, Karen. And I just want to thank everyone for being here. I'm really excited to present to you all. I do want to say that this is about 2 days worth of content that I've had to really get down to the basic components. So there is opportunities for additional, more in-depth education on these topics. But next slide, please. Some of the objectives I wanted to cover today was I wanted to help you guys learn the components of a grant proposal, including an outreach and engagement plan, learn how to measure the impact of your proposed work and communicate it through your grant proposal, and then finally learn how to engage with other organizations or with the community and public to strengthen your proposal. Next slide. So we'll start with the components of a grant proposal. Next slide. Before that though, I just want to say one of the best pieces of advice I can provide is try and become friends with a program officer. Regardless of the type of funding entity, there's usually a program officer or point of contact for questions and support. I've had different experiences engaging with program officers, and while there are a few that aren't able or aren't interested in developing a relationship, I've found that most of them are very helpful and supportive and I have developed great relationships, great relationships with them. At a minimum, they can help you navigate organization-specific grant process requests. And at best, I've had them asked to meet to discuss potential projects as they seek feedback in advance of the application. While this may be the exception, as some funding organizations discourage this, they can reference current priorities or goals for their organization, which can help strengthen your grant application. Again, I found most program officers to be very supportive and recognize the importance of establishing a rapport with those they fund. They're oftentimes also the ones you work with for quarterly reporting and other deliverables, so it makes sense that you keep a good working relationship with them, so they can also be your advocate if you encounter issues in implementing grant activities or need to pivot due to unforeseen circumstances. Next slide. So a grant proposal is the document that a grant seeker puts together to make a case for why the funder should support their idea. Although the language may vary quite a bit on the grant applications and RFPs, there are common elements for most grant proposals that we'll go through today. Whether it's a simple 2-page proposal or a big 40-page federal grant, these categories include the organizational statement, the needs statement, goals and expected outcomes, project description narrative, budget, timeline, and the evaluation framework. There can occasionally be an outreach section as well, or information from the outreach plan can be included in other sections. So let's start with the organizational statement. I think it's the easiest part. It's basically talking about who you are. This section can be called different things: organizational background, history, or overview. Sometimes it can be split into different sections. The intent, however, is to give a brief overview of who you are and what you do. And I like to think of this part as the initial handshake and formal introduction to the funding organization. You want them to be interested enough to seriously consider the rest of your proposal. If your organizational statement isn't in alignment with their priorities, they may not be interested in your project, no matter how great it is. You should resist the temptation to jump ahead and say everything you want to do and why in this section. Rather, in this section, you should just clearly and concisely establish credibility of your organization. The questions that you typically answer in this section are what type of organization you are, what's the purpose or mission of your organization, what are your strategic priorities, what population or populations do you serve, and then what geography do you cover? And lastly, what success has your organization already achieved? What makes you stand out from the rest of the grant applicants? Second part is the needs assessment. Needs assessment can also be called the issue statement, problem or situation to be addressed. This is very similar to a literature review, but it's important to use local data to describe the situation if you have it. It's fine to pull from research literature or case studies, but the more you can narrow the specific community or area that the project is taking place, the better. You need to make sure this section gives context, is supported by facts, sets the proposal's tone, frames the issue, and explains why you think your project will be successful at addressing the need. This is now where the details need to be drilled down. What need is your grant application addressing? For example, mental health issues are on the rise with children due to the current pandemic. I've also did my best to create some recycling specific examples for the slide. Be specific, get specific. One of the biggest challenges in grant writing is trying not to solve too much with one grant. Again, I want to reiterate that there's no one standard format for grant proposals, and you need to look at the RFP for guidance. Some applications ask for a needs statement, they ask for a needs statement, while others expect you to explain the problem or issue in the narrative section. The problem statement needs to be supported with research and should bring attention to your grant idea so the grant maker feels compelled to continue reading your proposal. Next slide, please. Third section is the outcomes and goals. Outcomes, goals, or expected impact are the change you plan to achieve. While a goal or objective is something you set, it becomes an outcome or impact once you achieve it. These answer the question, so what? Ideally, outcomes focus on longer-term community change or change within the population served. They should correlate directly to your need statement. They should reflect a meaningful yet realistic positive change that takes place if you do what you say you're going to do with your proposal. Your evaluation methods, which we'll cover later, should measure the indicators related to your goals and objectives. Clear goals guide the rest of your proposal. It's important that the key members of your team, as well as partners, agree on the goals. You may find that working together to land on very clear and specific goals, that you end up changing the details of the program you're proposing. We'll cover goals and outcomes in the evaluation and outreach plan sections as well in a second. Next slide. So the project description section can be called many different things, including the project narrative, proposed activity, methods, plan, or outputs. Sometimes with smaller grants, it's just a section that simply states, describe your project, or what do you propose to do? This section outlines the main steps you'll take to achieve an outcome and the key details of what you will do, including responsibilities, time frame, obstacles, and sustainability plans. Based on the identified need, this section outlines your proposed steps for moving the project forward to address the needs that you identified. Next slide. So the next section is the budget. Budgets are vital to all grant proposals. The budget shows how you plan to allocate and utilize funds to support your program or project. Some grant makers require a very detailed budget, while others just ask for something general. Depending on the grant, a funder may require two budgets, the operating budget for the organization and a program budget for the activities. The operating budget includes all revenues and expenses of the organization, typically for the current or upcoming year. And the program budget just shows the anticipated revenue and expenses for the program that's in the grant. Some grant makers have their own budget forms they require you to complete. Others require a budget narrative in which you describe your budget. Others allow you to use a spreadsheet or table to illustrate your budget. You should make sure that you request adequate funding to cover what you propose to accomplish. Underestimating costs may make the proposal seem unrealistic, and you may run into difficulties implementing a proposal if you receive what you ask for, but it is not enough to complete the tasks. Padding your budget, on the other hand, is also can come with consequences. If your budget or certain line items seem inflated, a grant maker may question the efficiency of your proposal. They may see all or part of your proposal as a want rather than a need. Sorry about that. Tips for developing the budget. Be sure to follow the grant guidelines. Do not include ineligible expenditures. If a funder does not reimburse for administrative or overhead expenses, then don't include them. The budget should line up with the narrative and plan of work. Key items that appear in the narrative should also appear in the budget and vice versa. Make sure you do some research to find the best deals and seek out quotes. you may want to justify cases in which you budget for equipment, materials, or services that are not at the lowest price points, but they do have a qualitative advantage. And lastly, it's good to have others review your budget and see if it makes sense and looks complete. Next slide. Real quick, I wanted to just touch on match. So what is match? It's something that sometimes donors request so they can combine their funds with funds from other sources. These sources can be in-kind contributions, such as volunteer hours or donated items. Match can also show greater buy-in, that there's more people investing in the project, as well as justification for the project, as opposed to the funder just saying, well, if you're asking for 100% of this and there's no other funds, why don't I just do this myself? So just things to consider. All right, the next part of a grant proposal is the timeline. It lists key tasks that will be accomplished in visual order. Sometimes they also include the key person responsible, which I really like because it's a great communication tool. These might be listed by months or years, or they may just be more generic or on a relative calendar like month one or year one activities, which can reduce the need to redo the timeline should the grant funding be delayed or postponed. Next slide. Oh, thank you. Evaluation is one of the most important pieces of your grant proposal, as it will demonstrate to the funder that you are, one, able to measure the completion of project activities to make sure you are on target for key milestones, and two, demonstrate at the end of the project that the funds led to measurable results that you claimed they would. No one wants to spend money and not be able to say whether or not they got their money's worth. There's 4 different types of evaluation that may be applicable to your grant efforts. Formative evaluations can be thought of as needs assessments. They're used to collect and summarize data on the issue or population you're looking to work with. Demonstrating your ability to do these types of evaluations can strengthen your proposal, as it can demonstrate that you have already done the work in the area and can provide justification for why your project is important. Process evaluation is really just a fact check, or excuse me, a self-check. For example, you compare your activities reports with the proposed timeline to demonstrate whether or not you're on track. Doing this can help identify whether the project deliverables or timeline might need to get adjusted. And it's a good way to show the funder that you're making progress on your projects. Outcome and impact evaluations really go hand in hand in that they both measure whether or not your activities achieved your desired goals and objectives. When thinking about an educational program as an intervention to improve understanding of a topic or lead to a behavior change, outcome evaluation is for each individual who attended the program, while the impact evaluation summarizes the success or failure of all participants. So if you have 10 participants and 5 changed their behaviors and 5 didn't, then the impact was that 50% of participants changed their behavior. Next slide. Just some quick evaluation tips. Connect what you are measuring directly to your objectives and to your program. Involving stakeholders in the design can really help improve the effectiveness, the accountability, and the cultural appropriateness of your evaluation. Think about what it is you're trying to achieve and what types of indicators you can use to help capture the data. Be sure to follow best practices for conducting evaluation processes to protect participants' confidentiality, and make sure responses are voluntary whenever appropriate. You should always try to avoid leading questions or forced answers for online surveys. All right, so some common data collection or evaluation methods include conducting surveys, interviews, focus groups, and case studies for measuring indicators related to your goals. Evaluation helps you measure and report impact to the grantor. It can provide feedback about the program so it can be improved, changed, or expanded in the future. Sharing the impact of your program is also important for your organization. Positive impact can be shared with donors, community stakeholders, and the general public through annual reports, press releases, and articles across various media. There are 3 main types of outcomes that these methods can help you measure. Short-term outcomes include improving understanding, literacy, or awareness of an issue, and are educational in nature. Pre-post tests are usually the most common type of measuring tool for to measure short-term outcomes. Then there's medium-term outcomes that deal with action or behavior change. These can be done after an educational activity or project is completed. either through follow-up surveys, interviews for individuals, or focus groups for a cohort of people, or through your personal observations. Direct counts are another type, but they aren't always considered an evaluation. For example, if you are just counting the number of people who attended a program, then you're actually measuring an output, not an outcome. However, if you were counting the number of times people used a recycling bin placed in a public area that was part of the grant project, then you can say, for example, that 25 people used that recycling bin, which infers that the bin was, if the bin wasn't there, that those materials might otherwise not have been recycled. You don't need a professional researcher to develop and implement these, but it is good that they're defensible and that you can point to their use in other efforts. It's even better if you can get someone with the experience with evaluation to help you with the project, or at least help with the design and the methods. All right, so here's some examples of goals, objectives, and outcomes. And I encourage Matt or Jim to chime in if, again, I apologize. This is from a generic presentation. I tried to make it as applicable to this audience as possible. But when looking at goals, objectives, and outcomes in an evaluation plan, I like to think of going from generic to specific as you go from goals to outcomes. So a goal is a general or overarching thing that you want to accomplish. It can be broad and represent a long-term vision. An objective is a little more specific and is focused on the thing you plan to achieve. And then the outcome is focused around the result and it's due to the action you have or plan to take. It's also what you compare your evaluation results to in order to determine whether your project or effort was successful. In order for objectives and outcomes to be effective, they should be SMART, which is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So specific is that they're narrow in focus. You can always have multiple objectives is what I try to tell people. That they're measurable. If you can't measure it, then you can't really demonstrate whether or not you achieved it. That they're achievable, that you can accomplish given the time and other resources available. That they're relevant, that they align with the organizational values of both your organization and theirs, as well as the grant and project objectives, and that they're time-bound, that they're end-dated when the objective is expected to be met. And I fully acknowledge that I don't have SMART objectives in this examples, but I did try to make the outcomes SMART, which I think is more important since those are the ones that get compared to the evaluation. Being as specific as possible with your outcomes will help you compare your proposed outcomes with the results from your evaluation. If they match, then congratulations. You now have evidence that you successfully achieved your desired objectives. There's a lot of nuance and difference in opinion with how those terms are related. In fact, when I was preparing for this presentation, this is the section that I took the most time on to refamiliarize myself with the definitions. If you are confused, I recommend looking at the grant RFP for guidance, or at least making sure that you remain consistent in how you use the terms throughout your proposal. All right, next slide. All right, so here's a linear way of looking at a project, from inputs all the way to achieving the goal or the impact of the project. You can see that the inputs like financial and human resources can help you accomplish activities, which can lead to project results or outputs. And if efforts include education and outreach, then you use evaluation tools to determine whether the outputs resulted in learning or action outcomes, as mentioned in the previous slide. Project activities like installing recycling bins might not lead to educational outcomes, but might jump directly to action outcomes in that they lead to behavior change due to making adoption of a desired practice easier. The total summary of your outputs is the impact of your overall project. So where should you start when putting together a logic model? If you can just click forward once. That the impact, believe it or not, it's better to start here, in my opinion. After all, you already have identified your goals and objectives. So if you start here and work backwards, it can help you understanding what funding and other resources you might need to achieve the project. If you can click forward just once. So if you already know what you want the project impact to be, then you can start to develop learning and action outcomes and project results that will lead to impact. From there, you determine what activities you need to do to achieve the project results or outcomes. And finally, you can look at what financial and human resources you might need to accomplish the activities. In reality, this can actually be an iterative process as you develop the grant proposal. I always used to hate logic models, but I've come to love them because once you start thinking of projects in this way, it makes it really easier to predict what changes or disruptions might do to the project. For example, if the funding entity comes back with a lower dollar number than your initial request, you can go to your logic model and adjust accordingly, as less resources may lead to less activities, which filters all the way down to potentially reducing the project's overall impact. If I can leave you with one word of advice, it's that don't promise to do the same amount of work with the same impact for less money that you think will take. The logic model can also be used as a communication tool to the grantor for managing expectations of a reduced budget, as well as a justification for getting a full amount of the grant award. Next slide. So real quick, here's another version of a logic model. There's so many different versions and model templates online that you can find to use if the grant RFP doesn't come with one. I like completing this one and the Gantt chart or timeline at the same time to make sure that the project activities and timeline are consistent, because that is nothing more confusing when grants are being reviewed if different parts of your proposal have different timelines or objectives. All right, next slide. So I have a full 90-minute presentation on outreach and engagement if anyone's ever interested. And while I find education and learning theory fascinating, I don't want to bore you all with unnecessary information. That being said, I did want to focus on a key difference between outreach and engagement. At its most basic, outreach is about awareness and education, either through direct activities like teaching and instruction, or indirect through publications or informational placards. Engagement can also be about awareness and education, but it also includes co-learning and appreciation that everyone brings their experience and expertise to the effort and sees the community and public as a partner, not as a recipient of information. I'll provide a quick example of a potential learning fallacy around recycling. If people just knew about recycling practice and knew how important it is to the future of our community planet, they'd start recycling. If you're looking at this statement through an outreach lens, it would make complete sense. You'd also be completely wrong. There's numerous studies that have shown educational activities can be effective at achieving desired learning outcomes, but there's also numerous studies that show that educational activities don't always lead to desired action. And this is where engagement comes in. Engagement increases the potential success of your educational efforts by providing local and relevant context to data, developing trusting relationships, and even having people be involved in the development of proposed project activities. Instead of assuming that teaching about the importance of recycling will lead to increased recycling activity, engagement means asking people why they do or don't recycle, understanding any obstacles or barriers. Maybe there's no recycling bins where they live. And then co-creating solutions, like placing recycling bins at the office or the neighborhood park if they think that that's what would help them increase their recycling efforts. Next slide. Real quick, kind of touched on all of this in the different sections, but this is if you want to try to develop an outreach or engagement plan separate, which I like to do just because that's most of my priorities when I'm doing grants are educational in nature. If there is a separate section for an outreach and engagement plan, then these are some good recommendations for how to develop that section. If there isn't, it's still good practice to put together an outreach plan that can help inform several other sections, including the goals and outcomes, project description, timeline, and the evaluation framework. First, you want to identify the need for the knowledge or project. Often that's called broader societal impacts in the grant RFP. Second, you identify the specific target audience. I try to avoid using general public, especially when you're doing engagement, because general public doesn't allow you to uniquely address or meet the needs of different groups in the communities. Next, you want to articulate the goals and objectives of the outreach plan. And then you want to outline specific tasks for achieving the project's goals and objectives, and just like in the logic model. And lastly, you want to outline how research efforts or the project efforts will be measured, just like what we talked about in the evaluation section. Measured change can be just as important as the project itself. If you were successful with this project and can show it, it can strengthen your application for future funding opportunities. All right, next is engaging with others, isolated impact versus collective impact. This is the last thing I wanted to cover. Um, there's some considerations on when, how, and who to partner with when applying for grant funding. As I've mentioned many times already, grantors provide funding because they want you to achieve a particular impact on an issue they are interested in. When working on a project by yourself, it can oftentimes be difficult to achieve impact, especially if you're a small municipal department or a nonprofit. This isolation may be by choice or it may be due to different organizational priorities. Examples of different priorities include duration of effort. For example, if a potential partner is interested in the same issue as you are, but maybe because it's just because it's today's hot topic, and they could just as easily shift interest when the next exciting issue comes along. They could also have different priorities. A potential partner may be interested in a related issue as you, but they're only interested in partnering and where they see the overlap. And lastly, it could be just a lack of holism, where a can't see the forest for the trees mentality can result in potential partners looking to address very specific problems, but perhaps not be interested in looking at the problem as a part of an entire system. And this can be due to them only being interested in how the issue impacts them, and solving the problem in a way that addresses their concern is more important than trying to solve the problem in a way that addresses everyone's concerns. Next slide. So these are just some examples of collaborations. I want to be clear that many of these are still good examples of collaborations and can be successful, but there are some limitations that I wanted to go over. Funder collaboratives are essentially groups of funders that pool resources to support common issues. Many times, funders may stay in their own specialty area, which makes comprehensive approaches to addressing issues difficult. Additionally, they may be less interested in evidence-based results, which may not be bad for you if you're not providing or offering evidence-based results in your grant proposal. Public-private partnerships are when government and private sector organizations come together to address a common issue. One downside to these types of collaborations is they can be narrow in focus, either because they're only interested in addressing one specific issue, or they don't have the oversight or interest with different actors in the system. For example, manufacturers, retailers, consumers, recycling processors, et cetera, may all need to be involved to address an issue. But if the governmental entity or business only works with a couple of these groups, it can be challenging to address the problems as a whole. Multi-stakeholder initiatives are when organizations from different sectors work together on activities. One challenge is that different priorities can mean different desired goals and outcomes, which can make framing a project or measuring its effectiveness challenging. And lastly, social sector networks include all informal and formal relationships among groups and individuals to address short-term issues. While I try to stay away from social media, I'm guessing everyone on this webinar here has heard a story about crowdfunding or a specific cause on social media, a social media campaign trying to help a specific cause by putting pressure on a government decision maker to try and achieve a desired outcome. Many social sector networks are behind some of these efforts that work to achieve social and environmental change through online efforts. While these have gotten much better organized over the past several years, historical criticism to these collaborations was that there was a lack of mission and vision, which resulted in a reduced ability to pursue long-term efforts. Next slide. All right, so lastly, I want to talk about collective impact collaborations. It's the gold standard, but again, I just want to say that that doesn't mean that other projects work really good too, but this is really the ideal situation. There's 5 characteristics to a successful collective impact collaboration, and that they are that partners co-create and support common goals. They share a common measurement system to determine whether desired outcomes or impact is achieved. Their activities reinforce one another, and that each activity and effort builds on a previous effort to continue to move the group forward. They have effective communication and strong relationships, and they're supported by or coordinated through a backbone organization, which can provide training, coordination, fund management, planning, etc. Common backbone organizations are state government agencies, statewide or multi-state organizations, or even nonprofits that are developed as a separate entity that has representation from all partner organizations. Again, these are not easy to develop or sustain, but they can be extremely effective in achieving common goals among a group of partner organizations. And with that, thank you very much. I know this was a lot of material to cover in a short amount of time. There were elements of this presentation that were taken from a Purdue extension program called Beginner's Guide to Grant Writing, which they spend 2 days diving deep into many of the components presented. MSU Extension is currently developing this effort for communities in Michigan, and we'll be sure to announce broadly when those trainings are available. And with that, I will hand it over to Matt.
Thanks, Josh. Wow. Thank you for reminding me how little I know about the work that I do. So that was impressive. I had no idea there was such a pedagogy of knowledge related to grant making that we do every day. So awesome work. And I wanted to also thank Kelly and Katie and Karen and Terry for the work that you're doing to make this happen. And I think that last slide that you had, Josh, about collective impact, I would say that Karen and I have been collectively impacting the heck out of this stuff for many years. I think that what you described and the leadership that Michigan Recycling Coalition provides to this space and bringing you all here today shows that collective impact that's happening with recycling. So, and I'm happy to be part of it, and I'm glad that I can talk with you all today. So let's go through some slides. Let's see the next slide. So Josh talked about sort of the theory and the concepts and what all needs to be there. And Emily and I were texting back and forth during his talk, and I said, wow, we need to get this online so that we can help you think about those different components, especially that first 10 minutes. Because what I was thinking about, what my joke to Emily over text was, boy, if everybody could do the things that Josh is saying, it would make our life a lot easier. It would be easier to evaluate, and we could get better projects. And so now we have, as you know, an opportunity that was mentioned. And then Jim is going to talk about next cycle as well, which this is an exciting time to be working in Michigan right now, because there's funding, there's partnerships, there's interest in that collective impact and seeing you all succeed. One of those projects, the funding RFP is out online. Grant applications are being accepted right now. The application linked there, and hopefully we'll have this shared and you can click on this thing. I'm not sure how that really works for you watching this, but you don't have to do it now. It'll throw us into another world. And the RFP, make sure you read the RFP. That's your guide as you fill out that application. And then I'll share some tips with you as we go forward. So next slide. So I want to share 6 tips with this group from our experience in what makes a successful project, how we select them. And then I'm going to wrap it up with our actual selection criteria. And you're going to see how these all fit into that evaluation that we do. I love this. I love that Josh did this theory, and I'm talking about the outcomes as related to what we're looking for. And outcomes, I would say, are the first thing you need to think about, because ultimately you need to match what your grant or the funding source is looking for. So, for example, this past year, we finally opened our eyes again. I'm so glad to talk about greenhouse gas impacts and making that connection from materials management and recycling into what those outcomes are. So it's not only just the tons created, the people that are using the bin, which is important. We are also looking for those final results of any grant that we're supporting. So being able to talk about that in your grant application is important. And obviously, those impacts of access and participation are critical as well, because that's how we're going to show that we're seeing those additional tons coming through the system. And one of the things that we always talk about is that we select projects that have the best quantitative data. So you can say, yeah, we're going to put out recycling bins in a downtown area. But if you don't have any data to show that that's going to have the impact, what the greenhouse gas, then it's going to make it hard for us to evaluate that. So my recommendation is you build that alongside or into the grant so that we know at the end that it's being evaluated. And Josh, I'm going to be talking with you later about those 4 different types of evaluation, because I think you could teach me quite a bit on how to do that better. So next tip, please. Tip number 2, partnerships. We really, really like that. And Josh nailed it. It's like, okay, if you're going to do it yourself, well, we can do it ourselves. We'll just go put out a contract. The grants are meant to create a system. And that's one of our main goals, right? We want to see the system work. And it has been our experience that with partnerships, you're able to have a longer term sustainable project. And it's not just state dollars. You've probably heard me say a couple of times over the past few, I don't know, 6 years since we've started working on achieving the funding available through these grants, is this can't be done on the backs of state government. In fact, most of you on this call don't want this to be done on the backs of state government. You want the private sector to have to create a good business case. You want the public sector to be the resources that you already are. You don't want state government doing this. So how do we do that? We form partnerships. And I want you to think more than just those letters of support. We love seeing letters of support from one organization or another, but it's really about what activities are those people that are writing those letters of support, what they can actually bring to the project, because that makes it stronger. Tip number 3, please. There we go. A budget, man. This for me, just me personally, is the most important thing. But because I can't evaluate something if it looks like a budget is like just on the back of an envelope. I would say that that's the first thing that I look at. What type of thought went into it, how you did the evaluation, what the expense was, what kind of quotes you have, how you have identified those costs, because that's for me even more than the first paragraph that Josh mentioned. It's seeing that we are being good stewards of the funds, and that's really comes down to our accountability as a state agency, to the accountability up to through the governor's office over to the legislature. We have to make sure that those funds are managed in a way that is clearly defined and measurable and auditable. So having that clear budget is really important. So describing those tasks associated with budget, I like it broken down. This is how much this task is going to be for this activity, and have it very, very, very clear. And then also the match and the sources. So on the market development grant, you'll notice that you can bring match in to do other activities that wouldn't be receiving reimbursement, but you're showing that that's part of the project. So we may match 100% of a piece of equipment, but you're demonstrating there's match in other things like project evaluation or space or real estate or staff time. That's how you're building it. On the infrastructure grant, and this, by the way, this presentation isn't meant to be like walking you specifically through that RFP. We will be doing that later. This is meant to be, okay, think about this in terms of overall thoughts about any grant that you do, and then specifically, what one person it might be thinking about your project. So, and then we can get into some questions if we have time on that. So, on the infrastructure grant, it's set up a little bit differently, where you would get a match percentage on that piece of equipment. And I can explain what that is later. And then this is an interesting one that's given us some internal conflict maybe. And we've thought a lot about this, but we like to see as much match coming to the project as possible. because of that thing that I said, it can't all be done on the backs of the state government. We need to show that there's additional funding coming in, because that's part of our story that we're telling. We leveraged dollars. We created an opportunity to grow investment in Michigan and bring partners together to show that recycling is working. That's our story, right? Well, if we're giving all the money just to a few different projects, then we don't get that multiplier effect. And so that's why we say supply as much match funding as possible. That's how we're evaluating it. Well, let's flip that coin over and think about equitable access to recycling. And if we think about it, not every community has resources that other communities have. Not every project or business has the same resources. So how do we think about equity and not just looking at one region of the state or where the lowest hanging fruit is? So we've got this conflict built up. So what I would recommend is that you demonstrate that in words, like explain what that is. Let's go to tip 4. I'm checking time check. Okay, we're doing okay. Long-term sustainability, develop that business strategy, create that sustainable funding model. If you're coming in and saying, okay, this year we're going to do a project and we need money to do this, but we don't know what's going to happen in the following year. We don't know how we're going to maintain those recycling bins. We don't know how we're going to, put a new belt on our on our conveyor. If it's not thought out with a sustainable funding mechanism, then you're going to not score as high. And then avoid requesting funds that are one time, and you're going to need more grants after that. That's not to say that some of the projects that would come through, particularly the market development grant, where you're doing some evaluation, some market analysis, really you're setting the stage, you're building that local capacity. So you'll see those as categories, and the funding amounts are a little bit lower for those. And I know I'm speaking very quickly, and let me go to tip 5, and I'll say that if anything that I'm saying you want to talk about, Josh was right. We'll talk. Emily's nicer than I am. The other recycling specialist will help you out better than I will, but you give me a call, you'll come. The phone number at the end goes right to my phone here, and I'd be happy to talk with you about any questions that you have, even brainstorming projects and partners. And then also, obviously, you'll hear more about Next Cycle in a minute. That's the whole intent of that. Solving that problem, helping us tell that story as well. And like Michigan is finding those problems. Or looking at problems and being a leader in recycling. So identifying super drop-offs, organics collection, worker safety came up a lot in COVID. Robots, technological advances, challenging end markets, whether it's glass or mixed plastics, flexible film. That's going to lift your program up higher in the what that is, and then that it is a project worth funding. And always think about replicability and scalability. So what that means is you can do a project. Can somebody else do it? How are you going to and then making that a larger project in the future for somebody else maybe, or yourselves. Tip number 6, tell your story. My story is a hamster in our new house. So there's miso with Amelia. So what makes your project unique? How does that project leverage your community assets? And imagine the press release that you're going to have with this project at the end. What's that ribbon cutting look like? Go to the end and think back. Okay, what's our big story? And this actually will help you write your project better, because you're going to need a very concise introductory paragraph. Because what ends up happening is grant funders they're like, oh, did you read that one? Oh, yeah, that's the one where they're doing that really cool thing. Oh, and so okay, that helps to tell your own story about your project that you're doing. So think about those sound bites that will make your project stand out. And tip number 7. No, I guess that was tip number 6. Let's wrap this up. When you get to the recycling infrastructure grant, you'll see the selection criteria in there, and you'll see a list of things. And I broke it down into one word because there's a lot of words on a slide. Our selection criteria really is based on climate, equity, a good budget and work plan, having those partnerships, doing the education, and having a sustainable funding, increasing the access and having data to back it all up. And the next slide, please. And the market development grant selection criteria. Some of the similar things. One thing I want to call out with this one is circularity. Telling that story of materials coming back into the supply chain in Michigan is really an important focus of the market development program. And next slide. So tips for successful grant applications. Think about those outcomes. Form partnerships, present a clear budget, think about long-term sustainability, solve a problem, and tell your story. So there we have it. And I'll pass it on to Jim. Let's talk about next cycle. Oh, and there's a hamster eating a little taco.
Well, thank you, Matt and Josh and Karen, and very excited to hear all the really, really super guidance, both from Matt and Josh. Lots of best practices, lots of path forward approaches. And what we now want to give you some good understanding of is how Next Cycle Michigan is a resource for you to tap into so that your proposals can really achieve the kind of success you want, and also the kind of success that Eagle needs in order to say yes, your main goal. So if you go to the next slide. So Next Cycle Michigan is essentially a aligned collaborative initiative, much like Josh described, where the state of Michigan through Eagle has pulled together a partnership of RRS, the Recycling Coalition, and the Centropolis Accelerator, along with a lot of other resources to put forward a whole set of solutions that, if you can tap into them as you prepare for your grants, are really going to help you take your proposal to the next level. If you go to the next slide. And so what I'm going to walk through is a little bit of the context of the challenge we all have in front of us, some of the guidance that might come from looking at what our shortcomings are for recycling here in the state, and then how some of the tools of Next Cycle can really enable your success. And so thinking back to some of the criteria that both Josh and Matt identified, very simply, we're on a mission. We as a group are on a mission to triple Michigan's recycling rate. Huge lift, but a huge lift with lots of impact and rewards at the end. A growing diversion of 2.7 million tons from disposal in landfills, 2.7 million tons that then become commodities that actually are worked into the economy and would generate, at 45% diversion, $9 billion annually for the state of labor income, and $33 billion of overall economic benefit. And that's as big as our tourism industry. And so we are all part of a very important part of Michigan's economy and environment. Next slide, please. And as a result, there's job creation, there's economic benefit, and there's whatever role your program or initiative would have in that. And that's some of the context that Matt's kind of guiding you to tell that part of your story as part of your submission. Next slide. And so Next Cycle brings a range of tools that we want you to tap into and use as you see fit. And some of those things include what we call innovation challenges, very, very, very structured ways for you to bring your best project forward. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but also a tremendous amount of data analysis and mentoring and technical assistance resources of all kinds, things you can tap into right away. You don't need to wait until you get your grant. You can tap into some of those resources as you prepare your grant. Public-private partnerships and private-private partnerships are all part of that. And a lot of the tools that come from that public and private partnership include funding. And this is where what you see below in the slide of some of the advantages that Matt's speaking to, where economic, equity, circular economy, and climate change are all areas that we need you to show performance in. Next slide, please. And so the framework we want you to think about is a framework of best practices that we know from success stories are essentially the ingredients you need in order to achieve success, achieve results. And these have been proven over the years in terms of actual highly performing recycling programs where you need all the key elements of the infrastructure, the collection, the processing, and markets. And you need what will sustain those, the education engagement, the supporting policies, and the public-private funding that make things go. Next slide. And so we've tapped into a little bit of the work here of the team to ask the question, where are we doing well and where are we not? And so in the next few slides are just a few examples of some of the resources that are available to you as you look at your part of Michigan or you're part of Michigan's recycling system that you want to work on. Right now, we're at an 18% recycling rate. Right now, our recycling facilities have about 370,000 tons a year of capacity. Our organics processing facilities can do almost 2 million tons, pushed by largely by the yard waste system. And if you go to the next slide, but if we were to go to 45% in MRF processing capacity alone, we would have to add another 1.2 million, I'm sorry, another 900,000 tons of capacity, baling capacity, sorting capacity, shipping capacity. That's a huge lift. So how can your project help with that? Next slide. Similarly, we know that access to recycling, whether it's curbside, drop-off, commercial, is really a real shortcoming of our state. It's why our recovery rate, our diversion rate is so low. So how will your project help increase that access? And again, some of the resources that are available to you, track and monitor where drop-off sites are needed, where commercial collection infrastructure is needed, where curbside is needed, just as a few examples. Next slide. And then similarly, we know that organics, food waste, other types of source separate organics along with yard waste are a big part of how we would achieve 45% diversion. And so similar resources are available where if you want to focus on this organics area, there's the kind of data, the kind of actual what it makes to create a good project success stories that are right there in this area too. And go to the next slide. And this is really true across the whole spectrum of our recycling infrastructure. Where are the gaps and where are the opportunities? And that is a way that you're able to see essentially how the end market pull, which is also where we want to see some really strong proposals, can essentially be guided by some of the tools and information available through the Next Cycle initiative. Next slide. So what is Next Cycle? Well, what you'll find when you get engaged is not only a great team of resources, people and ideas and data, but also some programs. I mentioned the innovation challenges, these sort of accelerator tracks. Already micro grants are available to assist small amounts of money that might help your project or your team get your idea developed, or in fact, in some cases, actually get some progress underway. And you'll see some of that information in the grant applications. And then also the Renew Partnership Portal that is actually able to really bring partnerships and funding together along with support. And I am going to take a break for just a second as my cat decides it's finally time to get up. Hold on just a moment.
That's a new fun one, but our animals at home deserve this attention.
Well, that might be the only cat commercial in all of the MRC events here. Thank you. So let's go to the next slide. And so the Renew Partnership Portal, when you go to the Next Cycle website or have some conversations, is really where you can develop both some of the partnerships and collaborations that we've seen as so important to the state and to how to have a successful project. And also where funding, match funding and project funding is able to be leveraged. And so make sure you evaluate some of the potential there, whether it's certainly the Eagle grants that are being made available through the department, but also where perhaps trade association grants, corporate investment, or maybe your own corporation's investment along with your partners, links to actual impact investors and other types, possible links into foundations or other sources of funding that might be unique to your geographic area. And not to mention the tremendous amount of investment that actually happens from the public sector at the county, the city, the local government level, the regional government level. And these are dollars and projects and resources that could either push through shovel-ready projects that can become your grant proposals right now, or can be funneled into the challenge tracks. And if you go to the next slide, we then have in this portal a tremendous amount of partners already signed up. And so that's one of the things you'll be able to sort of get some exposure to, sort of some familiarity with, by looking through next cycle and the current partners. And really many of you will also want to be partners once you actually sort of begin to see what's available there and how to take advantage of it. Some of these actually are past recipients of grants, programs and initiatives that have demonstrated how things can be successfully implemented, both within in-house resources as well as Eagle Grant resources. And go to the next slide. And as well, there are the challenge tracks, which are a little bit longer term in development, but for some of you may be the track of choice. Certainly the micro scale tracks are part of the grant application right now and are something that's a relatively quick couple months turnaround. But a lot of the kinds of projects that we need to see happening in Michigan have a much longer development time, whether it's organics projects under what we call the flows track in the upper left, whether it's intergovernmental collaboration projects that we know take development time. Same with public-private partnerships in that middle track at the top. We've talked about the micro scale solutions where really the broad gamut of reduce, reuse, recycle can be pursued and supported. We're really excited about the roads track where there's a variety of paved surfaces of all types, paths, highways, county roads, city roads, campus paved surfaces, all of which have opportunities for recycled content, polymer modified asphalt, glass fault, rubber modified asphalt, compost that helps with stormwater runoff or just soil enhancement inside yard areas. Lots of potential there and a big lift in the marketplace. And then the ones we would expect in the recycling world, challenge tracks around recycling supply chain, getting that material from point of generation into an end market and all the logistical relationships that are part of that, including the equipment that's required, including the kinds of business practices or innovations in technology that are part of processing or secondary processing. And then the one that is kind of the star, the recycling innovation and technology, where really it's a unique time in recycling for those of you that have been doing this for a while, where robotic sorting, image recognition, optical recognition, tools that are digital based, handheld applications are all elements of some of the innovations we want to see here in Michigan. And as I was saying, they all take time. And so don't hesitate to stomp on your, I'm going to submit an application to Eagle Breaks if indeed you see that the smartest thing for you to do is actually to incubate or accelerate your project to the point where it's actually, really top shelf, 5-star ready for grant funding. Next slide, please. So when we think of what next cycle success looks like, indeed, these are the things that you want to think about in terms of your grant application and be able to demonstrate what the real impact is to communities across the state. Even if your project is just about your backyard and your township or your county, we really want to understand how that can be a solution for everybody. How are you helping pave the way, being a case study, demonstrating something that everybody should do, but you're the ones that are going to lead the way? What gaps are you going to fill in the recycling supply chains in Michigan that are preventing us from getting to 45%? And how can you demonstrate that you're part of that solution? How can you show that you're really bringing the investment, the match, the ground funding, and the team and talent that are going to not only problem solve for your particular application, but also, again, serve as role models, serve as mentors for future adoption? All of that leads to the real key ingredients of success, which is increased recycling access of all types, the infrastructure to move that material, and then the end markets to buy that material and give it another life. And all of that in the latest hot words are really building a robust and strong, resilient circular economy in Michigan, something that increasingly we are seeing as part of the future that we need to build. So next slide, please. And so really, the whole intent of this part of the presentation is really to think about how your success can be supported by some of the investment that Eagle has already made in developing a team to help you succeed and help you bring your best proposal forward. From a community side, an equity side, environmental side, economic development side, that's the success we want you to see. And so next slide. And thank you very much. And we're really looking forward to having you reach out. You can use this contact information or the Next Cycle Michigan or mirecycle.com as a way to basically make your contact. And then we look forward to helping you succeed. Thank you. And
Thank
with
you
that, I'm
so
going to
much,
turn it
Jim.
back to Karen. Yeah.
That sounds great. I appreciate it. Really great presentations from everybody. I appreciate you taking your time to present to the audience. I think I've got a couple questions to get started with, but I really invite the audience right now to put their questions in chat. If we don't get a whole lot of questions, this will be a shorter session, but this is a great opportunity to get the expertise that's right here to answer your specific question. The first question I have, I think I'll ask it of Jim and Matt. Back when we were working on the Governor's Recycling Council, we talked about the fact that as Michiganders collectively, we spend about $1 billion annually managing our waste, managing our materials. And we've talked about leveraging that spend that we already spend to change ourselves, to change from this waste paradigm to this recycling paradigm. Can you talk a little bit more about how you see that in leveraging these partnerships and this funding to meet a new end?
I'll take a first crack at that and then hand it over to Matt. Great point that in some of the work that was done, and I encourage anyone who's interested to go back to the GRC Governor's Recycling Council report and recommendations, because you'll actually probably see some ideas that might support what you're interested in. But behind all that is really an acknowledgement, as Karen was saying, of the huge amount of money that we already spend to take care of our waste. And when we think about those dollars, and really just, let's just think about collection. If we've got 100 trucks out there that are right now hauling trash, that 45% diversion rate means that really almost those same trucks need to be cleaned and repurposed, and then start hauling recyclables and moving those to a recycling facility instead of a disposal facility. So that repurposing of some of that $1 billion plus that we spend every year is how some of the, and I'm just going to call it the business case for recycling, comes together. Not only is that cost reallocated, some of the equipment can actually be reallocated, the cost to dispose of material is reallocated into the cost to process it and prepare it for market. The revenue from the sale of the material captures some of the value and helps cover some of those costs. And some of the systems that your communities, your company, you as a hauling operation have in place some of those get redirected to moving material to end market. And what we found with our build out analysis at the state level is that all of the combined investments that are needed in order to reach a 45% recycling rate add up to about $1 billion in new capital. That sounds like a lot of money, but when we actually look at all the investments that we already make in end markets, in landfills, in trucks, in containers, it's actually something that can be done. And we're already making really, really good progress just in the last couple of years towards that target. How does your project fit into that? And also, how does, from a budget point of view, in terms of Matt's indicating how you would present it, how can you make a business case for your investment that would demonstrate that it would be sustainable? And that really helps Eagle say yes when it comes to grant dollars. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Oh man, you hit it all. I want to add one thing. So what Karen asked about was that shift in spend, like from the disposal to recycling. And that is accelerating for two different reasons. One is we have some additional funds. We've got next cycle, we've got the market development grants, we got the infrastructure grants. So we're able to, we've got more tools to put toward helping that shift happen, so that those trucks are, instead of picking up trash at the curb, they're picking up recyclables, for example. And the whole partnership aspect that comes with next cycle. There are so many more people that are looking to invest, and they're investing in Michigan. They want to invest in your projects because of the movement that's happening. So the changes that are happening, the press that we're getting, people are Keurig Dr. Pepper, Nestle Waters, Meyer, they're all saying, okay, how do I come to this party? How do I support this? And so that's why things are accelerating so quickly. Which is really good for all of us. We've got more projects. We've got a bigger pipeline of projects coming through. We've got additional funding, and it really started with some of that conversation about the shift in mindset. Because what's bringing those partners to the table? Why are people talking about circularity? Because of the work that MRC has done for many years, talking about the importance of that stuff, the stuff that you have done for so many years, making those connections about creating that circular economy. So really it goes to this group, the people that are on this call. If you're spending your time on this, a lot of the reason that we're to this stage is because of the work that you've already done.
That's great. And we couldn't do it without our members and with you guys. So, so just to reiterate, we already spend a whole bunch of money to deal with these materials. We need to make investments to, divert those materials to a more productive use. And that's what this is really all about. So that's great. Rosemary Graham is looking for some quick examples. What's a tiny grant example for a micros project? What's a large grant example for, maybe a supply chain project? And what's an example of a new technology kind of project?
Sure. I'll take a small and a large, if one of you want to take the new technology one.
Yeah, I
and
can
then
do that.
Before I do that, I want to say that there have been a couple of questions that came across directly to me about the maps that were shown through Next Cycle. Those are all on the Next Cycle webpage. And please go to them. And if you see facilities in there that we need to add, we need to catch that. I mean, this is a process that begs your involvement. Why isn't my dot on the map? Tell us your dot's not on the map. We'll get your dot on the map. So I just wanted to make sure I got that out there really fast. So Rosemary, you had asked about a small project. One of my favorite small projects to talk about is the Bell's Brewery project. That was a small baler. They recognized that there wasn't enough volume coming through, just so for them to set up a collection program for grain bags. So they're working with other breweries. So we've got partnerships. One, so you check that box. They had a really clear budget. They wanted a baler. It was a small amount of money. They showed leverage. They showed that they were going to be spending some additional money, and they brought in the Kalamazoo Nature Center as sort of a fiduciary partnering group to make sure that was managed in a way that there were some checks and balances on the funds. So a small project, big impact, material coming in, being collected, and that had some secondary spinoff benefits. Their goal was to collect grain bags, but they recognized they had this equipment. Let's do some collect some corrugated cardboard and get that into market as well. So that's a good example, and that was only like $12,000 or $16,000 grant. And then a large one of my favorites to talk about is the city of Lansing and the work, this long process that Lansing and East Lansing went through to identify how they could get additional capacity. And they used data, they did evaluation, they had smart people working on the project to identify where those gaps are. And then they used they used that important storytelling component of getting the local officials to also agree that something is needed. And they informed and educated those local officials to say, yeah, there's more we can do. There are jobs we're missing. We're wasting greenhouse, we're not telling our sustainability story by driving this stuff all over the place. Let's process it here. So that would be a good example of a large project. So, and then Jim, you want to take a...
Yeah, and I'll actually give two examples on the research side. And when you think research, you might think high tech and academic institutions and all that. And I've got an example of that. But before that, I want to talk about a Kent County initiated project where they knew they wanted to solve the glass end market problem, glass recycling end markets for their region. And instead of just looking at their solution and submitting a proposal for that, they actually brought forward that we want to bring our collective team together and some other resources and our Kent County resources and do some work on what will make glass recycling work across the state. So really, really good example of that. Take our local problem and think about the whole state and how what we do, because they'll still make their choices, they'll use this to inform their choices, how what we do could help improve the opportunities for everybody else. A really good example of something that didn't require, traditional academic or even corporate research on that level. However, there is also opportunity for that more broad research. And this example is a really excellent one because it actually didn't end up requiring Eagle grant money, at least not yet, and instead was a result of some of the discussions that have happened here as part of next cycle and prep for it with Michigan Tech University and what's called the Remade Institute, a DOE-funded national initiative around recycling and remaking materials. And as they submitted their proposal to Remade for over $1 million, they said, why don't we use the work we're going to do on plastics recycling and markets and use Michigan as a demonstration project? And so they're really, as they just got approved recently, and they'll be bringing forward some of their research capabilities to talk about the kinds of technology that might be able to take mixed plastics and various plastic streams into market-ready resins and do that in a way that actually would build out a recycling end market infrastructure across the state. So those are examples on both ends of the extreme, and definitely the kinds of things that are definitely going to benefit Michigan in pursuing its goals.
Really good example, Jim, and it reminds me of the fact that there are all kinds of funders out there, not just the state, but community foundations and private foundations, and actually businesses that would just invest if they had data and information that showed them there's a ready market out there. Can you all speak to, how you find other funding opportunities that maybe go beyond, or how you leverage one funding opportunity to get more funding for something that's bigger?
I'd be interested in hear if Josh has any experience with that, seeing good stories that you've seen that happen with.
Yeah, it's actually one of the slides I took out. Yeah, no, there's tons of philanthropy boards. I can, Karen, if you want, I can send a couple links for your audience to look at. But there are online foundation or philanthropy databases. Some of them are even accessible through your local library for free. I always I try and get on as many state agency listservs as possible, because those are a great way to find funding opportunities. The other one that, when you talk about local businesses, we've found tremendous success with Meyer and with MSU Federal Credit Union providing really small grants when we're wanting to do workshops, or even if Meyer just they give a $500 worth of food, so they don't actually give the dollars per se, but they'll help support the food for the event. And each of those kinds of businesses, has a mandate from the larger organization, but then they have some flexibility on how they apply those funds. But yeah, if you want, Matt or Jim, you want to keep going, I can try and find that slide and talk.
Yeah, well, I think you're kind of referencing a model that was used. I think we have somebody from Emmett County on the call here, where they were able to take a grant application for carts and secure a whole range of partners who each were sponsoring a portion of some of the program initiative. And that's the kind of success that, that Eagle definitely wants to see. And so it doesn't hurt to ask, and you can't hear a no unless you ask. And there's a whole philosophy around fundraising that it's known as getting to know. And that's no. And in other words, ask until somebody says yes, and you got to ask a lot of times. And so look at your community, look at the different interested parties who might support your project. This is a good opportunity to mention that next cycle, you can prepare a next cycle profile where you simply on a single page identify your organization, identify your next cycle related mission, and then what's, very simple one-line description of your project. The idea is that others can then see what you're working on and consider the possibility that it might meet their needs, or they didn't know you were working on that, and let's collaborate. And then you also can, through the Next Cycle portal, submit a one-page or two-page concept description, and then we can get to work saying, actually, here's 5 people you should talk to. Here's 3 potential funders. Here's 6 possible implementation partners. And I defer completely to Josh's excellent material that describes sort of how partners might better fit or not fit. Remember to take a look at that as you try to do some matchmaking for your own needs. But yeah, all that potential is there.
Yeah, I want to just put an exclamation point on what Jim just said about the next cycle process. You come in with your concept proposal, and we have a team. That's one of the benefits of coming into that is it's not only coming into Eagle. This is an Eagle initiative. It's also having this environment where people can say, oh, this would be a good one for a crowdsourced, funding thing. This is the experience that we had, and sharing that knowledge. I'm sure if we had time, each one of you on this call probably has a story to tell about different funding or something that you've heard about. The knowledge base in this industry, in the recycling industry, is probably better than any other group because you have been scrambling in the trenches for so many years to get your recycling programs going. And so about those local foundations, about how to build those partnerships, and having the opportunities like this and the Michigan Recycling Coalition to share that knowledge is so valuable. There's a quick question about micros grants. Please go to the website on the deadlines for that. Our goal is to move those out yet this summer. So as far as the closing date, then there's an evaluation process, and we'll be contacting those successful applicants.
The micros grant is a rolling grant process. So, don't be dismayed if that timeline doesn't work for you. There's another process coming up. So just keep the work going and insert yourself into that process when it works for you, and you will be considered. Josh did put a couple of resources right in the chat for access to other foundations. It's probably a pretty exhaustive list. Community foundations are always good. I will also highlight what Jim said. Becoming a partner to next cycle also, puts your organization out there as being willing to partner and work on projects that may not come from you. And so as others seek partners for their big idea, put yourself out there to be that kind of partner. You never know where it might take you. As a reminder, I'll let you know that the recording will be available very shortly after the session, as will probably a PDF of the entire presentation. We do have a couple of follow-up polls for you. I will ask Kelly to put the first poll on the screen for us right now. We'll give about 45 seconds for everybody to fill out this poll, unless you get there really quickly. We'd like to hear from everybody, but it looks like it's slowing down. And so, Kelly, why don't you go ahead and start the second poll? This is interesting. You don't get to see these poll results, but yeses are coming in strong. So that's positive. And if there's a not yet, please feel free to reach out to any one of the speakers to see how you can set yourself up for that. And so, yeah, Kelly, why don't you go ahead and close that poll? We'll go to our last slide here, which is just a reminder that we've got 10 other sessions like this coming up over the next 3 weeks. Tomorrow's event, again, is really for local decision makers to help them see and be partners with you on the big projects you would like to see happen. If you're not a member of the Michigan Recycling Coalition, we'd love for you to become a member and get involved in the network. All kinds of great things happening. Tune into the House of Representatives today, see what they're doing on Part 115. If you feel like you are ready to reach out to your state representative to let them know how you feel about recycling in Part 115, now is the time to do that. So I want to thank very much Josh Gunn from MSU, Matt Flechter from Eagle, and Jim Fry for RS for sharing their knowledge about funding and leveraging funding and making big things happen. They are available to you. I'm available to you. We're all in this together. Thank you all for being here with us today, and please do share information about other events coming. Thank you.
Care, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.